You're listening to a modern abridgment of The War of the Worlds by Bookwave Studios. We've carefully kept all the key elements, chapter by chapter, of H.G. Wells' original masterpiece intact, while refreshing the language and length to appeal to modern readers. We hope you enjoy this modern abridgment of The War of the Worlds. The War of the Worlds. Chapter 1. The Eve of the War. Nobody thought Earth was being watched by aliens. While people went about their busy lives, intelligent creatures from Mars were studying us carefully, like we might study bugs under a microscope. These beings weren't just watching, they were making plans against us. Mars gets only half the sunlight Earth does. It's smaller and much older than our planet, which means it had been cooling down for much longer. By this time, Mars was slowly dying, its oceans shrinking to puddles, its air growing thin, and huge ice caps freezing at both poles. When the Martians looked across space at our green, water-rich Earth, they saw their only hope for survival. Before we judge them too harshly for what they did next, think about this. European settlers completely wiped out the native Tasmanians in just 50 years. Are we really in a position to complain if Martians treat us the same way? 6 years ago, astronomers spotted strange eruptions on Mars. A scientist named Lavelle reported seeing what looked like flaming gases rushed out of a gun. Most newspapers ignored this news. My friend Ogilvy, who studied the stars, invited me to look at Mars through his telescope. I remember that night clearly, the dark observatory, the quiet ticking of the telescope's motor, and Mars itself, just a small, bright dot with faint stripes. What I didn't realize was that the first Martian rocket was already flying toward Earth, getting thousands of miles closer every minute. That night, we saw another flash from Mars, a second rocket launching. Ogilvy thought it might be meteors or volcanoes. The chances against anything human-like on Mars are 1,000,000 to 1, he said. Similar flashes appeared for 10 nights in a row, then stopped. Meanwhile, the Martian cylinders silently raced toward us through space. Life on Earth continued as normal. No one suspected what was coming. One evening, I walked with my wife under the stars and pointed out Mars, a bright dot creeping across the sky. Around us, people sang, trains rumbled, and colored signal lights glowed peacefully. Everything seemed so safe and ordinary. Chapter 2. The Falling Star. Early one morning, people saw what looked like a shooting star streaking across the sky. It appeared to land about 100 miles east of Winchester. I was writing in my study and missed seeing it, though it must have passed right over my house. The next morning, Ogilvy went searching for the meteorite on Horsell Common. He found it near the sand pits, not just a meteor, but a huge metal cylinder that had crashed into the ground, throwing sand and gravel everywhere and setting the surrounding plants on fire. The cylinder was mostly buried, with about 30 yards showing. It was covered in a crusty, brownish scale from the heat of shooting through our atmosphere. The morning was perfectly still, no birds singing, no breeze, with the sun just beginning to warm the pine trees. Suddenly, Ogilvy noticed something extraordinary. The end of the cylinder was slowly turning. He realized with a shock. The cylinder was hollow, with a screw top, and something inside was unscrewing it. "Good heavens!" he exclaimed. "There's a man in it! Men in it! Trying to escape!" He rushed forward to help, but stopped when he felt the intense heat still coming from the metal. Panicking, he ran toward town to get help. The first people he met thought he was crazy. Finally, he found Henderson, a journalist, who listened to his story. "It's not a meteorite," Ogilvy explained breathlessly. "It's an artificial cylinder, and there's something inside." The two men hurried back. By now, the sounds inside had stopped, and a thin ring of bright metal showed between the cylinder and its top. Unable to do anything more, they went to town for help. By 8 o'clock, word had spread, and people were heading to the Common to see the dead men from Mars. Chapter 3. On Horsell Common. When I arrived at the pit, about 20 people were gathered around it. Several boys were sitting on the edge, throwing stones at the cylinder until I stopped them. The crowd was surprisingly quiet. I think many expected to find burned bodies and were disappointed by the inactive metal cylinder. I climbed into the pit and thought I felt a faint movement under my feet. Up close, the object wasn't particularly exciting, like an overturned carriage or a fallen tree. It looked like a rusty gas tank. Only someone with scientific knowledge would notice that the gray coating wasn't ordinary rust, and that the yellowish-white metal visible in the crack had an unusual color. By afternoon, the common had transformed. London newspapers had printed huge headlines. A message received from Mars. Carriages and bicycles lined the road, and a large crowd had gathered despite the heat. A vendor was even selling apples and ginger beer. At the pit, I found several men, including Stent, the royal astronomer, directing workers with shovels. More of the cylinder had been uncovered. Ogilvy asked if I would find Lord Hilton, the landowner, to request help controlling the growing crowd, which was interfering with their work. Chapter 4. The cylinder opens. When I returned at sunset, the crowd had grown to about 200 people. As I approached, I heard raised voices and saw some kind of commotion around the pit. Stent was shouting, "Keep back! Keep back!" A boy ran past me saying, "It's moving, screwing out. I don't like it. I'm going home." I pushed through the jostling crowd. Everyone seemed extremely excited, and I heard a strange humming sound coming from the pit. The end of the cylinder was being unscrewed from within, with nearly 2 feet of shining screw now visible. Suddenly, the lid fell off with a loud clang. For a moment, the opening appeared completely black. Then I saw something moving inside, grayish, billowy movements and 2 glowing discs like eyes. A gray tentacle, about as thick as a walking stick, wiggled out into the air, followed by another. A chill ran through me. A woman behind me screamed. The crowd began pushing backward in horror. I found myself alone at the edge of the pit, frozen with fear. A large, roundish creature, about the size of a bear, slowly rose from the cylinder. It glistened like wet leather in the light. 2 large, dark eyes stared directly at me. The creature had a rounded head with a mouth beneath the eyes, a lipless opening that quivered and drooled. 1 tentacle gripped the cylinder's edge while another waved in the air. The Martian looked horrifying. The V-shaped mouth with its pointed upper lip, the bundle of tentacles, the struggling breaths in Earth's atmosphere, and most of all, those enormous, intense eyes. It was something completely inhuman. The oily brown skin reminded me of fungus, and its slow, clumsy movements made my stomach turn. Suddenly, the creature toppled into the pit with a thud. It made a thick cry as another Martian appeared in the opening. I turned and ran toward some trees, unable to look away. All around the common, people stood frozen in horrified fascination. With new horror, I saw the head of a shop assistant, who had fallen into the pit, bobbing at the edge as he tried to climb out. He managed to get his shoulder and knee up before slipping back. Then he vanished completely with what might have been a faint scream. Everything fell quiet. The pit and the Martians were hidden by the mound of sand. The crowd stood in a great circle, scattered behind bushes and hedges, staring hard at those few heaps of sand. Abandoned vehicles sat empty, their horses feeding or pawing the ground nervously. Chapter 5. The Heat Ray. I stood frozen in the heather, staring at the Martian pit. Inside me, fear wrestled with burning curiosity. I began circling at a safe distance. Once, black whips like octopus arms flashed above the sand and disappeared. Later, a thin rod with a spinning disc rose up. What strange things were they building? As darkness fell, people grew bolder. Some walked right into the sand pit. I noticed a small group of men approaching with a white flag. Scientists trying to communicate with the aliens. Suddenly, 3 bright puffs of greenish smoke shot up. A hissing sound turned into a loud drone. A strange, humped shape rose from the pit, with a beam of light flickering from it. Then came flashes of flame. The men with the white flag seemed to catch fire instantly. They staggered and fell as trees around them burst into flames. This beam of deadly heat swept around in an arc, whatever it touched. Trees, bushes, ground burst into flames or began to smoke. I stood paralyzed as it passed between me and the Martians. Then the humming stopped, and the dome-like object sank back into the pit. The night grew dark and empty. The common was dotted with glowing fires. The delegation had been completely wiped out. Suddenly, fear crashed over me like a wave. I turned and ran blindly through the heather, certain the invisible death ray would strike me at any moment. Chapter 6. The Heat Ray in the Chobham Road. The Martians killed with a beam of intense heat that instantly ignited anything it touched. Wood burst into flames, metal melted, even water exploded into steam. That night, nearly 40 charred bodies lay around the pit. The entire common was deserted, except for scattered fires. In nearby towns, curious people were walking toward the common. Young couples used the excitement as an excuse for an evening stroll. Most had no idea what danger awaited. By 8:30, when the delegation was killed, about 300 people had gathered near the pit. Police tried to keep the crowd back, but many pushed forward to see. The crowd survived only because a small hill protected them from the direct beam. It swept over their heads, lighting up trees, shattering windows, and bringing down part of a house. For a moment, they stood frozen as burning twigs and leaves fell around them. Hats and dresses caught fire. Then someone screamed, "They're coming!" Panic erupted. Everyone pushed and shoved to escape. Where the road narrowed, people jammed together in a desperate struggle. 2 women and a little boy were crushed to death in the chaos. Chapter 7. How I Reached Home. I remember little of my flight except stumbling through darkness. My mind filled with invisible Martians, their heat ray ready to strike me dead. I finally collapsed from exhaustion near a bridge. When I sat up later, my terror had strangely vanished. Everything felt dreamlike. Had it really happened? Walking unsteadily, I passed a workman who wished me good night. A train rushed by with lit windows. People chatted outside their homes. How could this peaceful scene exist just miles from such horror? I stopped to ask a group of people, "What news from the common?" "Haven't you heard of the men from Mars?" I said when they looked confused. They just laughed. I couldn't find words to describe what I'd seen. At home, my wife gasped at my haggard appearance. Over our untouched dinner, I told her everything. "The Martians move very slowly," I said, trying to reassure her. "They can't escape the pit." Her face turned white. "They may come here," she repeated. I explained how Earth's gravity is 3 times stronger than Mars, making the Martians too heavy to move easily. What I didn't realize, Earth's oxygen-rich air would energize them, and their machines could overcome physical limitations. Sipping wine, I grew overconfident. "They're probably terrified themselves," I said. "A single shell in the pit would kill them all." I was like a dodo bird, unaware of approaching hunters, saying, "We'll peck them to death tomorrow." I didn't know it then, but that was the last normal dinner I would eat for many strange and terrible days. Chapter 8. Friday Night. The most amazing thing about that Friday was how normal everything seemed, while the world was about to change forever. If you'd drawn a 5-mile circle around the Woking sand pits where the Martian cylinder had landed, almost everyone inside it was still having a regular evening, eating dinner, putting kids to bed, working in gardens, or going on dates. In London, they thought Henderson's telegram about the unscrewing cylinder was fake news. His evening paper couldn't verify it because he was dead, so they didn't print a special edition. At Woking train station, life chugged along as usual. Trains arrived and departed. A boy sold newspapers that mentioned men from Mars, but nobody panicked. People on London-bound trains might have noticed strange, flickering red lights in the distance, but most assumed it was just a heath fire. Only around the edges of the common was there any real disturbance. A few houses were burning. A curious crowd gathered on bridges. Some brave or foolish souls crept near the Martians in the darkness but never returned, zapped by a sweeping heat ray. The cylinder stuck into Earth like a poisoned dart, but the poison hadn't spread far yet. Surrounding it was silent, smoking ground with dark shapes scattered about, the bodies of those who'd gotten too close. Beyond that was a ring of excitement, and beyond that, the world continued as it always had. All night, the Martians worked tirelessly inside their pit. Green-white smoke occasionally puffed up toward the stars. Around 11, soldiers arrived and formed a protective line around the common. Military authorities were finally taking things seriously. Just after midnight, people saw a second star fall from the sky into pine woods northwest of Woking. This was the second cylinder. Chapter 9. The Fighting Begins. I remember Saturday as a day of waiting and worry. It was hot and close, and I'd barely slept. When I went into my garden that morning, everything seemed calm, just a lark singing toward the common. The milkman came as usual and told me the Martians had been surrounded by troops overnight. Guns were expected. I heard a reassuring sound, a train running toward Woking. Life seemed almost normal. "They aren't to be killed if it can be avoided," the milkman said. My neighbor was gardening and offered me strawberries. He mentioned the pine woods near the Byfleet golf links were burning. Apparently the second Martian cylinder had landed there. "This lot'll cost the insurance people a pretty penny," he laughed, then grew serious about poor Ogilvy who'd been killed. After breakfast, I walked toward the common. Under the railway bridge, I found a group of soldiers with small caps and dirty red jackets. They told me no one was allowed over the canal. None had seen the Martians themselves, so they asked me many questions about what I'd seen the previous evening. I described the heat ray, which sparked a debate about tactics. "Crawl up under cover and rush 'em," said one. "What's cover against this heat?" "We need to dig trenches," argued another. "Ain't they got any necks?" asked a third. "Octopuses, that's what I calls 'em. Fighters of fish. It ain't murder killing beasts like that. Why not shell the darn things and finish 'em?" I left them arguing and went to find newspapers, but learned little new. The town seemed calmer with soldiers present, though residents near Horsell had been evacuated. Around 4:30, I went back to the station for an evening paper. The Martians remained hidden in their pit, with smoke rising and hammering sounds continuing. Soldiers had tried signaling them with flags, but the Martians ignored them completely. I found all this military preparation exciting. The Martians seemed so helpless in their pit. It hardly seemed fair. Around 6, while having tea with my wife, we heard a muffled explosion from the common, then gunfire. A violent crash shook the ground, and I saw the Oriental College burst into flames, the church tower collapsing. The Martians' heat ray had reached us. I grabbed my wife and ran with her into the road. "We can't stay here," I said. "But where can we go?" she asked, terrified. "Leatherhead!" I shouted over the noise. I remembered her cousins lived there. People were coming out of their houses in confusion. Horsemen rode past, some galloping toward the college. The sun looked blood-red through the smoke. I ran to the Spotted Dog Inn to borrow a horse and cart, offering the landlord £2. "I'll bring it back by midnight," I promised. He was puzzled by my urgency, but agreed. We loaded some valuables and the servant's box, then drove away from the smoke and noise, down Maybury Hill toward Old Woking. Looking back, I saw thick black smoke with threads of red fire rising into the air. People were running toward us, and in the distance I heard machine gun fire and rifles cracking. The Martians were burning everything within range of their heat ray. I whipped the horse and drove as fast as I could. Chapter 10. In the Storm. We reached Leatherhead, about 12 miles from Maybury Hill, around 9 o'clock. The horse rested while I had supper with my cousins and left my wife in their care. She was oddly quiet during the trip and seemed full of dark thoughts. Her face was very white when we parted. For my part, I felt feverishly excited, almost like war fever. I wasn't entirely sorry I had to return home that night. I wanted to witness what was happening. I started back around 11. The night was unexpectedly dark and hot. Clouds raced overhead, but no wind stirred the shrubs. My wife stood in the doorway light watching until I climbed into the cart, then abruptly turned and went inside. As I drove through Ockham, I noticed a blood-red glow along the western horizon that slowly climbed the sky. Storm clouds mixed with black and red smoke. Ripley Street was deserted, except for a small group of people who said nothing as I passed. I don't know what they knew about what was happening beyond the hill, or whether the houses I passed were safely asleep or abandoned in terror. As I climbed the hill beyond Pyford Church, the red glow came into view again. Trees shivered with the first hints of the approaching storm. Then midnight chimed from the church behind me, and Maybury Hill appeared dark against the red sky. Suddenly, a green flash lit the road. The third falling star. Lightning flashed violet by comparison. and thunder cracked overhead. My horse panicked and bolted down the hill. The lightning continued in rapid flashes, the thunder sounding more like an electric machine than normal rumbling. Thin hail struck my face as I drove. Then I saw something moving rapidly down the opposite slope of Maybury Hill. At first I thought it was a wet roof, but lightning revealed it was in swift motion. Another flash showed it clearly. A monstrous metal tripod, taller than houses, striding over pine trees and smashing them aside. A walking machine with dangling steel ropes and a clattering roar that mixed with the thunder. Each lightning flash showed it closer, tilting with 2 feet in the air, like a giant 3-legged stool being violently kicked along the ground. Suddenly the trees ahead parted, and a second huge tripod appeared, rushing toward me. My nerve broke. I yanked the horse's head around. The cart tipped over and I was thrown into a shallow pool of water. I crawled under some bushes. The horse lay dead with a broken neck. The colossal mechanism strode past me toward Purford. Seen up close, the thing was incredibly strange. It wasn't just a machine, but something alive, moving with ringing metallic steps and long, glittering tentacles that swung around its body. One tentacle gripped a young pine tree. A hood swiveled like a head looking around. Behind was a huge basket of white metal, with puffs of green smoke squirting from the joints as it passed. It let out a deafening, triumphant howl. Alloo, alloo, then joined its companion half a mile away, both bending over something in the field. I believe it was the 3rd cylinder they had fired from Mars. For several minutes, I lay soaked in the rain and darkness, watching these metal monsters moving in the distance. The hail intensified, making their figures misty between lightning flashes. Eventually, I struggled to my feet and spotted a small wooden hut nearby. I ran for it and hammered on the door, but no one answered. Using a ditch for cover, I crawled toward the pine woods near Maybury. It was very dark in the woods, with lightning becoming less frequent and hail pouring down through the trees. I was bruised, exhausted, wet to the skin, and half deaf from the storm. I had a vague idea of reaching my house, but no real plan. I staggered through trees, fell into a ditch, bruised my knees, and finally splashed into the lane leading from the College Arms. The storm was washing sand down the hill in a muddy torrent. A man blundered into me, screamed in terror, and ran off before I could speak. Near the top of the hill, I stumbled over something soft. Lightning revealed a man's body, the landlord of the Spotted Dog, whose cart I had borrowed. His neck was broken, likely thrown against the fence. I continued toward my house. Nothing was burning on the hillside, though red glare and smoke still came from the common. I let myself in with my key, locked and bolted the door, then collapsed at the foot of the staircase. I sat there shivering, my mind filled with those striding metal monsters, and the dead body smashed against the fence. Chapter 11. At the window. I found myself cold and wet, standing on my staircase. After changing my soaked clothes, I headed to my study, drawn there for reasons I couldn't explain. The window looked out over the trees toward Horsell Common. The room was dark, making the scene framed in the window even more shocking. The thunderstorm had passed, but the landscape was completely transformed. The college buildings and pine trees had vanished. In their place was an eerie red glow. Huge black shapes, strange and monstrous, moved back and forth in the distance. The whole countryside seemed to be on fire, a hillside covered with dancing flames that swayed in the wind. Smoke occasionally blocked my view of the Martian machines. I couldn't see exactly what they were doing, but the air smelled strongly of burning pine. As I crept closer to the window, I could see more of the destruction. Houses were burning near Woking Station. The pine woods were blackened and charred. A wrecked train lay on the tracks, its front cars smashed and on fire. Between these islands of destruction stretched dark patches of countryside, broken by glowing, smoking ground. It reminded me of factory towns at night. At first I saw no people at all, though later I spotted dark figures hurrying across the distant railway line. This was the neighborhood where I'd lived peacefully for years, now transformed into fiery chaos. I still didn't understand the connection between these mechanical giants and the strange creatures I'd seen emerge from the cylinder. Were they intelligent machines? Or did Martians sit inside them, controlling them like our brains control our bodies? While I was lost in thought, a soldier climbed into my garden. The sight of another human snapped me back to reality. I called to him softly, and he cautiously approached the house. I let him in and locked the door. In the darkness, I couldn't see his face clearly. His hat was missing and his coat hung open. "My God!" he gasped as we entered. "What has happened?" I asked. "What hasn't?" he replied with a gesture of despair. "They wiped us out. Simply wiped us out." I offered him whiskey, which he gulped down. Then he collapsed at the table and began sobbing like a child. I stood beside him, oddly detached from my own recent terror. When he calmed down, he told his story. He was an artillery driver who'd been in action only that evening. His unit had positioned a gun near Horsell to target the sand pits where the Martians were gathering. When his horse stumbled, throwing him to the ground, the gun behind him exploded. He found himself trapped under dead men and horses. "I lay still," he said, "scared out of my wits, with part of a horse on top of me. We'd been wiped out. And the smell, good God, like burnt meat." He described hiding under the dead horse, watching as soldiers tried to attack the pit, only to be instantly destroyed. The Martian machine had risen up on 3 legs and walked among the survivors, using its heat ray to kill everything in its path. Within minutes, nothing living remained on the common. We ate some food from my pantry and returned to my study window. In the gray dawn light, we could see the full extent of the devastation. Our peaceful valley had become a valley of ashes. Countless shattered houses and blackened trees stood starkly against the morning sky. Near the pit stood 3 metallic giants, their hood-like heads rotating as if surveying the destruction they'd caused. Chapter 12. What I Saw of the Destruction of Weybridge and Shepperton. As dawn brightened, we left the house. The artilleryman wanted to head toward London, while I needed to get to Leatherhead, where my wife was staying. Since a Martian cylinder blocked my direct route, I agreed to travel with him partway. We packed food and whiskey and moved carefully through the deserted streets. Bodies lay in the road, and abandoned possessions were scattered everywhere. Clocks, slippers, valuables dropped in panic. We passed a horseless cart filled with furniture, overturned with its cash box smashed open. The morning was strangely quiet. No wind, no birds singing. We spoke in whispers and kept glancing over our shoulders. Near the road, we spotted 3 cavalry soldiers riding toward Woking, carrying a signaling device. "You're the first men I've seen coming this way," said the lieutenant. "What's happening?" The artilleryman explained about the Martians. "Giants in armor, sir, 100 feet high, 3 legs and a body like aluminum, with a mighty great head and a hood." "Get out," said the lieutenant. "What nonsense." "It's perfectly true," I confirmed. The lieutenant directed us toward Weybridge, where the army was gathering. As we continued, we saw people fleeing their homes and soldiers preparing for battle. Near Weybridge, 6 artillery guns were positioned to fire toward Woking. The artilleryman remarked, "They'll get one fair shot at any rate." Further on, men were building defenses with more guns behind. "It's bows and arrows against lightning," the artilleryman said. "They haven't seen that fire beam yet." Byfleet was in chaos. People packing, soldiers directing them, vehicles being loaded. I saw an old man arguing about leaving his orchid collection behind. "Do you know what's over there?" I shouted, pointing toward the pines hiding the Martians. "Death is coming!" At Weybridge, the confusion was even worse. Carts and carriages everywhere, wealthy residents packing, children excited by the commotion. Even amid the chaos, the local vicar was holding a church service. By midday, we reached Shepperton Lock, where the Wey joins the Thames. A crowd of refugees was trying to cross the river by boat. Most people seemed to believe the Martians were just powerful humans who would eventually be defeated. Suddenly, we heard the muffled sound of a gun firing from Chertsey. Batteries across the river joined in. Everyone froze, staring at the peaceful meadows where nothing seemed to be happening. Then the ground shook with an explosion that broke nearby windows. "Here they are!" shouted a man. Across the meadows came 4 armored Martians, striding rapidly toward the river like huge birds. A 5th followed, raising its heat ray device high in the air. The beam struck Chertsey, setting the town ablaze. The crowd at the water's edge stood shocked. Then came a rush of movement as people scrambled toward the boats. I shouted, "Get under water!" and plunged into the river. The Martian waded into the water, towering above us. Suddenly, 6 hidden guns fired together. The first shells missed, but one struck the Martian's hood directly. It exploded into fragments of red flesh and metal. "Hit!" I shouted, feeling a surge of triumph. The headless machine staggered but didn't fall. It reeled toward Shepperton, struck the church tower, then collapsed into the river with a tremendous crash. A violent explosion followed, sending water, steam, and mud shooting into the air. A huge, scalding wave swept around the bend. I saw people struggling to reach shore, their screams barely audible above the roar. Before I could celebrate, I noticed the other Martians approaching. When they saw their fallen comrade, they unleashed their heat rays across the landscape. Houses dissolved into flames, trees exploded into fire, and people were struck down as they ran. I struggled through the boiling water toward shore, half-blinded and in agony. I collapsed on a gravel bank at the river junction, expecting to die. Through blurry vision, I saw the Martians retrieve their damaged comrade and retreat. Somehow, miraculously, I had survived. Chapter 13. How I Fell In with the Curate. After experiencing the power of human weapons, the Martians retreated to Horsell Common. Had they continued immediately toward London, nothing could have stopped them. But they paused, allowing the military to set up defenses around the capital. Meanwhile, I escaped the destruction by finding an abandoned boat. My hands were badly burned, but I managed to paddle downstream. I passed deserted villages with houses still burning. It was strange seeing buildings on fire without crowds of onlookers. Eventually, exhaustion and heat overcame me. Near Walton Bridge, I collapsed on the riverbank. Later, I walked a short distance before resting in the shadow of a hedge, frustrated that I couldn't reach my wife in Leatherhead. I don't remember exactly when the curate appeared. I became aware of him sitting nearby in his dirt-smudged shirt, staring at the sunset-tinted clouds. When I asked for water, he replied wearily, "You have been asking for water for the last hour." We studied each other silently. It must have looked frightening. Nearly naked except for wet pants, scalded, my face blackened by smoke. He was thin-faced with pale blue eyes and light curly hair. "What does it mean?" he asked vaguely. "What do these things mean?" He continued in a shaky voice. "Why are these things permitted? What sins have we done? I was walking after morning service to clear my head, and then fire, earthquake, death, like Sodom and Gomorrah." I tried asking practical questions about our location, but he kept returning to his religious crisis. "The church! We rebuilt it only 3 years ago. Gone! Why?" He quoted scripture dramatically. "The smoke of her burning goeth up forever and ever," pointing toward Weybridge with a trembling finger. I realized he was nearly broken by shock. I tried to encourage him. "You must keep your head. There is still hope." "Hope?" he cried. "This must be the beginning of the end. The great and terrible day of the Lord." I lost patience and stood over him. "Be a man. You're scared out of your wits. What good is religion if it falls apart during disaster? Think of all the earthquakes and floods and wars people have faced before. Did you think God had given Weybridge special protection?" After a silence, he asked, "But how can we escape? They are invulnerable, they are pitiless." "Neither completely true," I answered. "One of them was killed just hours ago." When he noticed flickers in the sky, I explained they were signals, signs that humans were organizing a defense. "The Martians are over there, and toward London they're building earthworks and placing guns." As we spoke, we heard distant gunfire and strange cries. Then silence fell. The crescent moon hung pale above the smoke of burning towns. "We had better follow this path," I said, northward. Chapter 14 in London. My younger brother was in London studying medicine when the first Martians fell at Woking. That Saturday, the morning papers barely mentioned it. Just a short note about strange creatures from Mars killing a few people with some kind of gun. The report ended reassuringly. The Martians seemed unable to climb out of their crater due to Earth's gravity. In his biology class, students were curious about the news, but London's streets remained calm. By afternoon, papers mentioned troops moving toward the Common and burning pine woods, but nothing more alarming. Even when telegraph lines went down that evening, most people assumed fallen trees were to blame. My brother wasn't worried about me, knowing the Martian cylinder had landed 2 miles from my house. He decided to visit and see these things before they were destroyed. He sent me a telegram, which never arrived, and spent his evening at a music hall. Later, when he tried to catch a train to Woking, he learned accidents had closed the line. Few connected these problems with the Martians. Sunday morning brought more news, but still little panic. Londoners, used to sensational headlines, calmly read reports about Martians wrecking Woking station and massacring an entire battalion. The papers described them as slow-moving creatures, comparing the situation to animals escaped from a zoo. My brother attended church, still unaware of the growing danger. Later at Waterloo Station, he heard vague reports of fighting around Weybridge, but details remained scarce. By afternoon, military activity increased dramatically. Artillery guns moved into position around London, and police cleared civilians from platforms. Walking down Wellington Street, my brother bought a newspaper from shouting vendors, "Dreadful catastrophe!" and "London in danger." Only then did he grasp what we faced. The Martians weren't small, sluggish creatures, but mind-swaying, vast mechanical bodies. 100-foot-tall machines moving as fast as trains, firing beams of intense heat. The military had positioned guns around London and claimed to have destroyed one machine, but the others had killed many soldiers with their heat rays. The papers reported perhaps 15 Martians at most fighting against our millions, urging the public not to panic. Authorities were preparing to destroy any new cylinders that landed. Sunday night passed normally in London. My brother returned to his apartment, heard distant gunfire through the night, but eventually went to bed. He woke before dawn Monday to pounding on doors, running feet, and frantic bells. Red light reflected on his ceiling. At his window, he saw police rushing house to house, shouting, "The Martians are coming!" Newspaper sellers appeared with shocking news about a new weapon. The Martians discharge enormous clouds of black and poisonous vapor. They've destroyed Richmond, Kingston, and Wimbledon and are advancing toward London. There is no safety from the black smoke except in instant flight. London's 6 million residents began to wake and run. The city that had gone to bed oblivious Sunday was now, in the early hours of Monday, consumed by panic. "Black smoke!" voices cried everywhere. "Fire!" My brother grabbed his money and rushed into the streets to join the growing exodus. Chapter 15. What had happened in Surrey. While the curate and I hid in meadows near Halliford, and my brother watched refugees stream across Westminster Bridge, the Martians launched their next attack. Most had remained in the Horsell pit until Sunday night, releasing strange green smoke as they prepared. Around 8 o'clock, 3 Martians advanced toward the towns of Ripley and Weybridge, moving about a mile apart. They communicated with eerie howling sounds that rose and fell in pitch. The Ripley gunners, untrained volunteers, fired one hasty volley before fleeing. The Martians simply walked over their abandoned guns, but at St. George's Hill, better-trained men fired from a hidden position in pine woods. Their shells struck one Martian, who staggered and fell. The men cheered too soon. The damaged Martian let out a long howl, and immediately another appeared. Both aimed their heat rays at the battery. Ammunition exploded, trees burst into flames, and only a few soldiers escaped. For half an hour, the Martians paused. The damaged one crawled from its hood, appearing as a small brown figure, and repaired its machine. By 9, it was working again. Then 4 more Martians arrived, each carrying a thick black tube. Similar tubes were given to the first 3, and all 7 spread out in a curved line between St. George's Hill, Weybridge, and Send. As they moved, warning rockets shot up from the hills, alerting military positions. 4 more fighting machines crossed the river. The curate and I saw 2 moving toward us through the mist. I crawled into a roadside ditch while the curate ran, then joined me. The machines halted nearby. The Martians formed a giant crescent, 12 miles from end to end around London. An eerie silence fell, the calm before battle. Facing them were hidden batteries of guns, waiting for them to advance into range. After what seemed forever, we heard distant explosions. The Martian near us raised its tube and fired with a deafening bang that shook the ground. The other Martian answered. There was no flash or smoke, just the explosive sound. I peered out, expecting to see destruction, but saw only sky and mist. Then I noticed the Martian moving eastward along the river. Looking towards Sunbury, we saw something strange. A dark, cone-shaped hill that hadn't existed before. Across the river was another such hill. Then I spotted a third to the north. Everything had become very still. These weren't hills, but massive clouds of black vapor released from canisters fired from the Martian's tubes. The vapor was heavier than air, sinking down and flowing like liquid into valleys and ditches. Anyone who breathed it died instantly. It was possible to escape by climbing at least 50 feet high, as one man did in a church spire. He stayed there for a day and a half, looking down at the black expanse with occasional roofs and trees poking through. After the vapor had served its purpose, the Martians cleared it by directing steam jets at it. We watched this from a deserted house, also seeing searchlights and hearing siege guns firing uselessly at the invisible invaders. A fourth cylinder landed in Bushy Park as a, quote, brilliant green meteor. Meanwhile, the Martians methodically spread their black vapor toward London, forming a line from Hanwell to Coombe and Malden. Wherever artillery might be hiding, they released black vapor. Where guns were visible, they used their heat ray. By midnight, they had created a network of black smoke covering the entire Thames Valley. That Sunday night marked the end of organized resistance. No group of men would stand against them anymore. Only desperate attempts to set mines and traps continued. Picture the fate of those batteries near Esher, officers alert, gunners ready, when the black vapor rolled toward them. Men and horses ran, screaming and falling as the cloud enveloped them, choking on the ground. Then, darkness and silence. Before dawn, the black vapor flowed through Richmond, and the government made its final efforts to urge Londoners to flee. Chapter 16, The Exodus from London. As Monday dawned, fear swept through London. The trickle of fleeing people became a flood, creating chaos at railway stations and around Thames shipping. By 10 a.m., police control was collapsing, and by noon, even the railways had broken down. Train lines north of the Thames had been warned by midnight Sunday. People fought desperately for space in carriages. By 3 a.m., crowds were being trampled in streets hundreds of yards from stations. Police, exhausted and angry, began attacking the very people they were supposed to protect. As train drivers refused to return to London, more people took to the roads. By midday, a Martian was spotted at Barnes, and black vapor was flowing across the Thames, cutting off escape over bridges. Another cloud trapped survivors in Ealing. My brother tried to board a train at Chalk Farm, but couldn't get through the desperate crowd. He escaped to the street and stole a bicycle from a shop, cutting his wrist as he pulled it through the broken window. He rode up Haverstock Hill, avoiding overturned horses, and reached Edgware by 7 a.m., hungry but ahead of the main crowd. When his bicycle wheel broke, he continued on foot. He got food at an inn and waited, watching the growing stream of refugees on bicycles, in cars, cabs, and carriages. Eventually, he took a quiet lane eastward, heading vaguely toward friends in Chelmsford. Near High Barnet, he came upon two women in trouble, a short woman in white screaming, and a slender, dark-haired woman fighting off men trying to drag them from their pony cart. My brother jumped into the fight, knocking down one attacker. Another hit him between the eyes, but the dark-haired woman helped by firing a revolver she'd kept under the seat. The robbers fled, and my brother joined the women in their chaise. He learned they were the wife and younger sister of a surgeon from Stanmore. Their husband/brother had sent them ahead while he warned neighbors, promising to catch up by 4:30 a.m. It was now 9 a.m. with no sign of him. My brother promised to stay with them and pretended to be skilled with their revolver. They made a small camp while the pony grazed. As travelers passed, bringing more alarming news, my brother convinced them they should keep moving toward the coast, hoping to escape England entirely. As they approached Barnet, they encountered more refugees, haggard, dirty, stunned people. One man in evening clothes walked past clutching his hair, seemingly lost in private horror. At the crossroads south of Barnet, they suddenly faced a massive crowd. The main road had become a boiling stream of people rushing northward, with a great cloud of dust rising in the sun. Vehicles of every kind jammed together, while those on foot stumbled in ditches. "Way, way!" voices shouted. "They are coming!" A man in a Salvation Army uniform stood in a cart, shouting, "Eternity! Eternity!" in a hoarse voice. Some drivers whipped their horses frantically. Others sat motionless, stunned. There were fancy carriages, shop carts, wagons, even a brewer's dray with wheels splashed with fresh blood. The crowd contained every kind of person: well-dressed women with crying children, helpful men and cruel ones, street outcasts, workmen, clerks, a wounded soldier, and even a man in a nightshirt with a coat thrown over it. Despite their differences, all shared the same fear and exhaustion. They were thirsty with cracked lips, weary and footsore. Through all the noise ran one constant cry: "The Martians are coming!" My brother and the women couldn't cross this human flood. They turned back, but soon realized they had no choice but to try again. The younger woman showed remarkable courage. My brother held back a cab horse while she drove their chaise across. Then they were caught in the stream, swept along with the desperate crowd flowing north. They were carried through Chipping Barnet and managed to break free nearly a mile beyond the town. The crowd thinned as the road forked. They headed eastward through Hadley, passing people fighting to drink from streams. From a hill, they saw trains packed with people, even men riding on the coal behind the engines, fleeing north on the railway. The three stopped to rest, exhausted, hungry, and too afraid to sleep. All evening, more refugees passed their stopping place, fleeing from the horror they'd left behind. Chapter 17: The Thunder Child. On that Monday morning, London emptied itself in a massive panic. If you could float above the city in a hot air balloon, you'd see every road thick with tiny black dots, each one a terrified person running for their lives. Never before had so many people fled at once. 6 million frightened souls ran with no plan and no supplies, desperate to escape the Martians. From above, it would look like someone had spilled giant ink drops that spread across London's map. Beyond them, the gleaming Martian machines moved carefully, spraying their poisonous black smoke, then blowing it away with steam when they finished. The Martians weren't trying to kill everyone right away. They focused more on breaking down society, cutting telegraph wires, blowing up railroads and powder stores, and stopping all communication. They were crippling humanity rather than destroying it all at once. By midday, the Thames River was jammed with boats as people tried to escape by water. Money meant nothing now. People actually swam to ships, though many were pushed away with boathooks and drowned. When the black smoke appeared near Blackfriars Bridge, the river became chaos as people fought to board any vessel. My brother was still heading east with the 2 women he'd rescued. They aimed for the coast, hoping to cross the channel to safety. Everyone was starving, and normal rules were falling apart. Farmers guarded their fields with guns, while some desperate people even headed back toward London looking for food. By Wednesday, the 3 reached Chelmsford, where officials took their pony for food. They hurried to the coast and suddenly saw an amazing sight: the sea covered with more ships than imaginable. Every kind of boat had gathered: fishing boats, yachts, steam launches, merchant ships, even luxury liners. All were there for one purpose: to carry people away from the Martians. About 2 miles offshore sat a low warship, the Thunder Child. It was the only fighting ship visible, though far away a line of smoke showed where more warships waited, unable to stop the Martians. Mrs. Elphinstone panicked at seeing the sea. She'd never left England and feared foreign countries almost as much as the Martians. She kept saying they should return to Stanmore, where she thought her husband George waited safely. My brother finally got her to the beach and paid £36 for passage on a paddle steamer headed to Belgium. By 2 o'clock they were aboard, finding expensive food and seats. The captain kept taking on more passengers until the decks were dangerously crowded. He would have continued, but around 5 o'clock gunfire sounded from the south. In response, the Thunder Child fired a small gun and raised signal flags. The little steamer was just passing the crescent of ships when a Martian appeared in the distance, walking through shallow water along the coast. The captain cursed, his fear seeming to make the paddle wheels churn faster. My brother stared as this giant machine, taller than church towers, strode toward the ships like a horrible metal person. Soon, 2 more Martians appeared, all walking toward the sea as if to block the escaping ships. Despite the steamer's straining engines, they moved terrifyingly slowly away from the approaching giants. All the ships were now in panic, changing direction, letting out sails, blowing whistles. Suddenly, the steamer lurched, throwing my brother down. People shouted all around him. He jumped up to see an enormous iron ship, like a massive plow, tearing through the water nearby. It was the Thunder Child, charging at full speed toward the Martians. The warship didn't fire, but simply drove straight at the invaders. This seemed to confuse them. They weren't sure what to make of this new threat. One Martian shot black gas at the ship, but it rolled away harmlessly to sea. From the steamer, it looked like the Thunder Child was already among the Martians. The aliens retreated toward shore, and one raised its heat ray. Steam erupted where the invisible ray touched water. The ray must have cut through the ship's hull as easily as a hot poker through paper. Flames shot up through the steam, and the Martians staggered. In another moment, it fell as the Thunder Child's guns fired. At this sight, the steamer's passengers cheered wildly. Then, pushing through the foam, the Thunder Child drove forward, now on fire. It headed straight for a second Martian and got within 100 yards before the heat ray hit it. With a violent flash, the ship exploded, but its momentum carried the flaming wreckage forward, hitting the Martian and crumpling it like cardboard. "Two!" yelled the captain as everyone cheered. The cheer spread across all the escaping boats. Steam covered the water for many minutes. When it cleared, nothing remained of the Thunder Child, and the third Martian was gone too. The warships were closing in toward shore, and the refugee fleet scattered to safety. Thanks to the Thunder Child's brave sacrifice, hundreds of boats full of people escaped across the channel. As evening fell, the coast disappeared in clouds. Then suddenly, out of the golden sunset came the sound of guns and moving black shadows. Everyone rushed to look, but nothing could be clearly seen. As twilight deepened, the captain shouted and pointed. My brother strained to see something rushing up from the gray. Something flat and broad that swept upward in a curve, grew smaller, and vanished into the night sky. And as it flew, darkness fell upon the land below. Book 2, The Earth Under the Martians, Chapter 1, Underfoot. The curate and I were trapped in an empty house at Halliford, surrounded by the deadly black smoke. We waited there for 2 endless days, unable to do anything but worry and argue. My mind was fixed on my wife in Leatherhead. Was she safe? Was she mourning me, thinking I was dead? The distance between us felt unbearable. My cousin was with her, but he wasn't the type to recognize danger quickly. The curate only made things worse. His constant complaints and prayers drove me crazy. I started avoiding him, hiding in different rooms of the house just to get some peace. On Monday morning, we noticed the black smoke drifting toward the river. Around noon, a Martian came across the fields, spraying hot steam that shattered windows and even burned the curate's hand when he peeked outside. Later, we realized the smoke was clearing. We could finally escape. I wanted to leave immediately, but the curate kept insisting. We're safe here. I gathered food, water, and supplies for my burns. Finally, around 5 o'clock, the curate agreed to leave with me. The road to Sunbury was horrifying. Dead bodies of humans and horses lay everywhere, covered in black dust. It looked like the ancient ruins of Pompeii after the volcano. As we walked, we passed through strangely untouched areas. In Bushy Park, deer still wandered peacefully under the chestnut trees. We crossed Richmond Bridge around 8:30, where I noticed mysterious red masses floating in the river below. Near Kew, disaster nearly struck. The top of a Martian fighting machine appeared just 100 yards away. We ducked into a garden shed, trembling with fear. I couldn't stay hidden for long. My need to reach Leatherhead and find my wife was too powerful. In the twilight, I ventured out again, the reluctant curate trailing behind me. This was a terrible mistake. Almost immediately, we spotted another fighting machine in a field. It was chasing people, scooping them up one by one and dropping them into a metal carrier on its back. For the first time, I realized the Martians might want humans for something beyond just killing them. We continued our journey after dark, staying hidden along hedgerows. In Sheen, the curate complained of thirst, so we broke into a house. Later, we found a white house with a walled garden that had a fully stocked pantry. Bread, meat, canned goods, even beer. We were sitting in the dark kitchen eating when suddenly there was a blinding green flash. Then came the loudest crash I'd ever heard. The ceiling collapsed on us, and I was knocked unconscious. When I came to, the curate was dabbing water on my face. "Don't move," he whispered. "They might hear us." As dawnlight filtered in, we realized what had happened. A Martian cylinder, the fifth from Mars, had crashed directly into the house. We were buried in the ruins, with only the kitchen and scullery intact. Through a gap in the wall, I saw a Martian standing guard over the glowing cylinder. We were trapped, with monsters building something just outside our hiding place. Chapter 2. What we saw from the ruined house. After eating some of our food supply, I dozed off in the scullery. When I awoke, I found the curate peering through the hole in the wall. I crept up and touched his leg. He jumped so violently that plaster fell noisily outside. I grabbed his arm, terrified he'd cry out and reveal our hiding place. When I finally looked through the hole myself, I saw an amazing sight. The fifth cylinder had created a massive pit where part of the house had been. We were right at the edge of a giant circular excavation the Martians were making. The cylinder was open. Near it stood one of their fighting machines. But what fascinated me most was a strange mechanical device busy at work in the pit. It was a handling machine, a kind of metallic spider with 5 jointed legs and many tentacles. It moved so quickly and smoothly that it seemed almost alive. It was removing parts from the cylinder and assembling them with incredible precision. Then I saw the Martians themselves. They were unlike anything on Earth. Huge round bodies about 4 feet across, mostly head. Each had 2 large dark eyes and a V-shaped mouth with 16 whip-like tentacles arranged in 2 bunches of 8. Their internal structure was surprisingly simple, mostly brain, with nerves going to the eyes, ears, and tentacles. They had lungs and a heart, but no digestive system at all. Instead of eating food like we do, they fed by injecting fresh blood, usually human blood, directly into their veins. As disgusting as this seems to us, our habit of eating meat would seem just as horrible to a rabbit. The Martians had certain advantages. They didn't waste energy on digestion and weren't affected by moods from an upset stomach. They had other strange features too. They never slept. They had no gender and reproduced by budding like plants. They seemed immune to Earth's diseases. And most remarkable of all, they communicated without sound, possibly by telepathy. Their machines were just as fascinating. The handling machines moved, using a kind of artificial muscle made of discs that pulled together when electrified. As I watched, one was busy digging in the pit, shooting green vapor, and causing the rhythmic thumping that shook our hideout. I realized with horror that we were witnessing an alien base being built right outside our prison. Chapter 3. The Days of Imprisonment. Life in our hiding place quickly became unbearable. The curate and I would fight over who got to look through the peephole. Despite the danger, we couldn't resist watching the Martians. Our personalities clashed terribly. I grew to hate his constant whining and his inability to think clearly. He would cry for hours, believing his tears would somehow help us. He ate more than his share of our food, despite my warnings that we needed to be careful. As days passed, his behavior became so dangerous that I had to threaten him and eventually hit him to make him behave. He was the worst kind of coward, weak, cunning, and completely unable to face reality. Through the peephole, I watched more fighting machines arrive. They brought new equipment that was set up around the cylinder. One handling machine was producing shining aluminum bars from the clay it dug up. Between sunset and nightfall, it made over 100 such bars. I was struck by the contrast between the swift, precise movements of the machines and their slow, awkward masters. I had to remind myself that the Martians were the living beings, not their machines. One day, the curate was watching when humans were brought to the pit. He slid down in terror, and I took his place at the peephole. At first, I couldn't see what had frightened him. The twilight had fallen, and the pit was lit by flickering green fire from the aluminum-making process. Suddenly I heard human voices. A tentacle reached from a fighting machine to a cage on its back. Someone was lifted against the sky. In the green light, I saw it was a well-dressed middle-aged man. He vanished behind a mound. There was silence, then horrifying sounds from the Martians. I ran back to the scullery, covering my ears. I couldn't bear to watch. That night, I tried to think of an escape plan. The curate was useless. The horror had destroyed his mind. I considered digging our way out, but worried we might emerge right in front of a fighting machine. On the third day, I saw a young man killed and witnessed the Martians feeding. After that, I avoided the peephole for nearly a day. On the fourth or fifth night, very late, with the moon shining brightly, I heard sounds like heavy guns. The Martians had removed most of their machines from the pit. The night was beautiful and quiet. Then came 6 distinct booms like artillery fire. After a long pause, 6 more. Could it be? Were humans fighting back against these terrible invaders? Chapter 4. The Death of the Curate. On the 6th day of being trapped in that ruined house, everything fell apart between me and the curate. I caught him trying to sneak extra food I had carefully divided to last us 10 days. We fought over a bottle of wine which smashed on the floor. For 2 endless days, we faced each other. Me tired but determined, him crying about how hungry he was. I tried everything to make him behave. I yelled, I begged, I even offered him the last bottle of wine. Nothing worked. His mind was broken. I was trapped with a madman. By the 8th day, he stopped whispering and began talking loudly. He ranted about God and punishment, completely out of control. It is just, O God, he kept shouting. The poor were trodden in the dust, and I held my peace. I begged him to be quiet. The Martians would hear us. I have been still too long, he declared, standing up. Now I must bear witness. Whoa! Whoa! Shut up! I hissed in terror. No! He shouted, moving toward the kitchen door. I go! It has already been too long delayed. In panic, I grabbed a meat chopper hanging on the wall. I ran after him and struck him with the blunt end, trying only to knock him out. He fell forward and lay still. Too still. I had hit him too hard. Suddenly, I heard a noise outside. Crumbling plaster. A huge metal tentacle from a Martian machine was poking through our wall. Through a glass plate, I saw the dark eyes of a Martian peering in. I stumbled over the curate's body and hid in the coal cellar. Trembling in the darkness, I listened as the tentacle explored the kitchen, then dragged away the curate's body. I knew it would search for me next. Soon enough, the metal tentacle entered the scullery. It tried the coal cellar door. My heart nearly stopped when the door opened. The tentacle, like a giant metal worm, slid inside, touching everything in the darkness. Once it even brushed against my boot. I bit my hand to keep from screaming. Finally, it grabbed a lump of coal and withdrew. It returned briefly, then moved to the pantry where I heard bottles smashing. After a heavy silence, it was gone. I stayed hidden for 2 more days, afraid to even crawl out for water. Chapter 5. The Stillness. When I finally dared to move, I found the pantry completely empty. The Martian had taken all our food. For the first time, I truly lost hope. I went without food or water for 2 days. My throat became so painful that I finally risked using the squeaky water pump to get some dirty rainwater. No Martian came at the noise. The light seeping into our hiding place had changed from gray to blood red. On the 14th day, I discovered why strange red plants had grown across the hole in the wall. The next morning, I heard a dog sniffing around outside. I tried to lure it in, thinking I might catch and eat it, but it ran away. I heard bird wings fluttering and crows cawing outside. Gathering my courage, I peered through the red weeds covering the hole and saw something amazing. The Martians were gone. Their machines, their equipment, everything had vanished. Only some powder, metal bars, black birds, and skeletons remained in the empty pit. My chance to escape had come. Trembling with excitement and fear, I climbed up the rubble mound where I could see around me. The world outside had completely changed. The once familiar streets were now covered with knee-high red plants like alien cacti. Houses stood wrecked but not burned. Dead trees lined the roads or wore coats of red threads. Birds hopped among the ruins, and I spotted a skinny cat, but no people anywhere. After weeks in darkness, the daylight seemed blindingly bright, the blue sky impossibly beautiful. The air tasted wonderfully sweet. Chapter 6. The Work of 15 Days. I stood there stunned. Inside our hideout, I'd only thought about surviving each day. I hadn't realized how completely the world had changed. This wasn't just a ruined town. It was an alien landscape. For a moment, I felt something animals must feel all the time, the sudden understanding that I was no longer in charge. Humans weren't Earth's masters anymore. We were just another creature hiding from the Martians. Our time of power had ended. Hunger quickly took over these thoughts. I spotted a garden patch and waded through red weeds to reach it. I found onions, flower bulbs, and baby carrots, which I grabbed immediately. I kept moving, determined to find more food and get as far from the pit as possible. I came across a flooded area covering what used to be meadows. The water was shallow enough to wade through. This flooding, I later learned, was caused by the red weed, which grew enormous when it reached water. It had choked the rivers, spreading across the entire valley. I drank deeply and tried eating some red weed, but it tasted like metal. As I continued walking, the landscape became even stranger. Some areas completely destroyed, while others looked perfectly normal, as if people had just stepped out for a moment. I searched homes and gardens for food, finding only some small potatoes. I still hadn't seen any living people, only clean-picked human skeletons and scattered animal bones. A couple of dogs ran from me when I approached. From higher ground, I looked down on the flooded river, now tinted red with alien weed. Everything was silent. Blackened trees, wrecked buildings, and red floods stretched as far as I could see. For a while, I thought I might be the last human alive. But I reasoned that the Martians had probably moved on to find food elsewhere, perhaps attacking other cities. I was just a survivor in their wake, wandering through a world that no longer belonged to us. Chapter 7. The Man on Putney Hill. I spent the night in an abandoned inn at Putney Hill, sleeping in a real bed for the first time since fleeing Leatherhead. After breaking in, I found some rat-gnawed food and biscuits that kept me from starving. With a full stomach and quiet surroundings, my mind finally cleared enough to think properly. 3 thoughts kept spinning through my head: the killing of the curate, the whereabouts of the Martians, and what might have happened to my wife. I felt no guilt about the curate. It had been inevitable, a desperate act in desperate times, but the other thoughts tormented me. That night, for the first time since everything began, I prayed sincerely, facing the darkness and asking for help. Morning came bright and clear. Walking the roads, I saw scattered evidence of people's panic. Abandoned carts, trampled belongings, dried blood. I felt terribly alone. I thought about heading to Leatherhead to search for my wife, though I knew the chances of finding her were slim. Near Wimbledon Common, I suddenly felt watched. Turning quickly, I spotted someone hiding in the bushes. As I approached, a filthy man with a knife stood up. "Stop!" he shouted. "Where do you come from?" "Mortlake," I answered. I was trapped near the Martian pit and just escaped. We studied each other, and suddenly I recognized him, the artilleryman I'd met when the invasion first began. He recognized me at the same moment. "Good luck?" he exclaimed. "We're the lucky ones." He nervously scanned the sky. "Let's get under cover and talk." He told me the Martians had created a larger camp in London. At night you can see their lights over Hampstead, and I think they've built a flying machine. "If they can fly," I said, sinking to my knees, "it's all over. They'll simply go around the world." "It is over," he said confidently. "We're beat." His words hit me like a revelation. Somehow, I hadn't fully accepted our defeat until he stated it so plainly. "This isn't a war," he continued. "No more than between men and ants." Then he revealed his plan. "Men like me will survive, living underground. I'll use the drains and tunnels. We'll gather strong, smart people and save our knowledge. Eventually, we'll learn to use their technology against them. Imagine humans driving those fighting machines." His vision was exciting. I found myself completely convinced by his enthusiasm. We hurried to the house where he'd made his headquarters, which turned out to be just a coal cellar. He showed me a tunnel he'd started digging to reach the main drain. I helped him work through the morning, happy to have a purpose again. But as we worked, I noticed problems. The tunnel was only a few yards long after a week of work. When I asked why we weren't just entering through a manhole, he made excuses. Later, when we took a break to scout, I realized he hadn't been working consistently at all. We ended up spending the day playing cards, drinking champagne, and smoking cigars he'd found. By evening, I realized he was just a dreamer. All talk, no action. His grand plan for humanity's survival was just a fantasy that made his hiding and drinking seem noble. That night, I decided to leave him to his delusions and head to London myself to learn what was really happening. Chapter 8, Dead London. I left the artilleryman and headed toward London. The red Martian weed grew thickly everywhere, especially near water. Along the way, I passed a man, alive but hopelessly drunk and covered in black dust. As I walked deeper into the city, the streets grew impossibly quiet. Bodies lay here and there, covered in the same black dust. Many had been dead for days. I saw broken shop windows where people had stolen food and other items. The deeper I went into London, the more profound the silence became. It wasn't just the stillness of death. It felt like a held breath, like the city was waiting for something. Then I heard it, a strange, mournful cry echoing through the empty streets. "Ula, ula, ula, ula," it wailed, growing louder when I moved northward. I followed the sound, exhausted and disturbed by the endless wailing. By the time I reached Oxford Street, the loneliness was crushing me. I broke into a pub for food and drink, then fell asleep on a sofa. When I woke, the crying still echoed. It was getting dark. I followed the sound toward Regent's Park. Near Baker Street, I finally saw the source, a Martian machine standing in the distance, making that mournful noise. Strangely, I wasn't afraid. The Martian wasn't moving, just standing there and wailing. As I moved closer to St. John's Wood, I came across a wrecked handling machine. It seemed to have crashed into a house. Nearby, I saw another stationary Martian standing silent in the park. When I crossed Regent's Canal, the crying suddenly stopped, creating a silence so complete it felt like a physical blow. The abrupt quiet terrified me more than anything before. While the voice had sounded, London had still seemed alive somehow. Now true emptiness descended. I panicked and ran, hiding in a shelter until well after midnight. Before dawn, my courage returned, and I headed back toward Regent's Park. In the early light, I spotted another Martian standing on Primrose Hill. Feeling reckless, I decided to march straight toward it. But as I got closer, I noticed something odd. Birds were circling its head, pecking at it. My heart leaped. I ran forward and climbed the earthen fort the Martians had built. Inside were their machines, their equipment, and the Martians themselves, lying dead in a row. They had been killed by bacteria, ordinary earth germs against which they had no immunity. After all our weapons failed, the smallest creatures on Earth had defeated them. Bacteria that humans had evolved to resist over countless generations had destroyed the invaders as soon as they breathed our air and consumed our water. Standing there, I felt overwhelming relief. The sun rose, lighting up London, damaged but now safe. I realized humanity would recover and rebuild. The terror was over. Chapter 9, Wreckage. What happened next is strange. I remember clearly everything until the moment I stood on Primrose Hill, thanking God for our deliverance. Then my memory goes blank for 3 days. I've learned since that I wasn't the first to discover the Martians' defeat. Others had already spread the news the previous night. The joyful message had flashed around the world. People were celebrating in cities everywhere, church bells were ringing across England, and food supplies were already being rushed to London from across the globe. But I remember none of this. I was found wandering in St. John's Wood, delirious and singing nonsense. Kind strangers took me in until I regained my senses. When I recovered, they gently told me that Leatherhead had been completely destroyed by a Martian. Everyone there was presumed dead, including my wife. After a few days with these generous people, I felt compelled to visit my old home, despite their attempts to dissuade me. The streets were already busy with returning people. Many shops had reopened, though everyone looked haggard, yellow-skinned with bright, haunted eyes. Aid was being distributed, and special police stood at street corners. In Wellington Street, I saw the red weed climbing over Waterloo Bridge. Nearby, a newly printed newspaper was selling for an outrageous price. It contained little news but claimed that scientists had discovered the secret of flight from examining the Martian machines. I caught a train from Waterloo, passing through devastated areas. Temporary rails had been laid where the lines were damaged. The countryside looked alien, streams choked with red weed, and forests scorched. Work had already begun around the last Martian cylinder, now topped with a Union Jack. When I reached my neighborhood, I walked to my house. The door had been forced open. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it nearly a month ago. Even my unfinished work on my desk, abandoned the day the Martians landed. The dining room still contained the remains of the meal I'd left untouched. My home felt desperately empty. I realized how foolish my hope had been. Then something strange happened. A voice said, "It is no use. The house is deserted." I turned to see the window open behind me. And there, unbelievably, stood my cousin and my wife, alive, though pale and tearful. "I came," she whispered. "I knew." She swayed, and I caught her in my arms. Chapter 10, The Epilogue. As my story ends, I wish I could tell you more about the Martians and their technology. Though I'm not a scientist myself, it seems clear they died because they had no immunity to Earth's bacteria. When their bodies were examined, they contained only Earth microbes. They never buried their dead, suggesting they knew nothing about decay. We still don't understand what made their black smoke so deadly, or how their heat rays worked. After terrible accidents in laboratories, few scientists want to study these weapons anymore. We know the black powder contains an unknown element with strange green lines in its spectrum, perhaps something that reacts fatally with human blood. By now, most people have seen the preserved Martian at the Natural History Museum. But more important is the question, will they return? I think we're not taking this possibility seriously enough. When Mars next aligns with Earth, I expect another attack. We should be ready to destroy their cylinders before they even open. Some scientists believe the Martians may have successfully landed on Venus instead. Strange markings appeared there shortly after Mars and Venus aligned with the Sun last year. This invasion has forever changed how we see ourselves. We now know Earth isn't a safe, protected home. We can never predict what might suddenly arrive from space. Yet perhaps this disaster had benefits. It ended our complacency, advanced our science, and united humanity in ways we never imagined possible. Our perspective has expanded dramatically. If Martians can reach Venus, humans might someday do the same. When Earth eventually becomes uninhabitable as our sun cools, perhaps life from our planet will have spread to other worlds. The terror of those days has left me permanently changed. Sometimes while writing in my study, I suddenly see flames again. When I walk outside, people passing by seem unreal, and my mind returns to those frightening times. At night, I dream of black dust covering silent streets and twisted bodies. I wake up cold and afraid in the darkness. When I visit London's busy streets, the crowds sometimes look like ghosts to me, phantoms walking through places I once saw empty and ruined. Standing on Primrose Hill, watching families enjoy themselves near the captured Martian machine, I remember seeing that same view silent and abandoned on that final morning. Strangest of all was holding my wife's hand again, knowing we both counted each other among the dead.